So by the time you see this video, if you haven't realized it already, you should realize it by now that America's house is built on sand. That's right, it's built on sand. And let me say this, that if you think it can be repaired, this house can be repaired, you have to deconstruct the entire house and build it on a rock before it can be right again. Now, I'm not calling for civil war. That's not going to work. There are many people that are calling for another civil war. That's not going to work. That is not going to fix the problem. But I'm going to just get started here. We'll go to Matthew 7, verse 24. Now, in order to understand Matthew 7, verse 24, you have to read the entire chapter. So I'm going to do that. Remember in the last video about, what is it, the pastor's wife claiming that the Christians don't abide by the, as she said, the New Testament, or the Old Testament, All right. Judge not that you be not judged. The very, very first things. And as Paul said, who are you, O man, who judges another man when you do the same things? Then Paul talks about how Jehovah's mercy, and Paul was speaking to the Romans in Romans 2. Who do you think he was speaking to the Romans about? They can't be going around judging and condemning the Jews, perhaps? All right, judge that you be not judged, because with the same judgment you judge, you shall be judged. And whatever measure you meet, it shall be measured to you again. Now, Christianity, even in the 1930s, when President Franklin Roosevelt rejected the shipload of Jews that was escaping Germany because they weren't Christians, you see. For whatever judgment you shall be judged, and with what measure you meet, it shall be measured back to you. And why do you look at the small dry stalk in your brother's eye, yes, the Jew's eye, but you consider not the beam that is in your own eye, O Christian? Yes, I added O Christian and Jew, because you see, history shows that 2,000 years worth of evidence proves that this is exactly what the Christians did against the Jews. Just as the one generation of Jews did against the Nazrim. What? What's Nazrim? We see, Nazrim, they are the followers of Yahushua. Christians are the followers of Jesus. They are two different peoples. So you Christians did to the Jews what the Jews in that generation, that first generation, did to the Nazrim. And if the Jews of that generation received judgment for rejecting these words in Matthew 7, in verses 1 through 5, then the Christians are going to receive judgment for what they did to the Jews. Folks, you must understand that the word of Yehoshua is indeed a two-edged sword. It swings and cuts both directions. It does not swing one way. It didn't swing only against the Jews. It's going to come back and swing against those who did not heed this warning. Why do you behold the mote that is in your brother's eye, but you consider not the beam that is in your own eye? How will you say to your brother, let me pull out the mote out of your own eye, forcing Jews to convert to your false idol, Apollyon? When there is a beam, Apollyon, in your own eye, you hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of your own eye, and then you will be able to see clearly to cast the mote out of your brother's eye. And do not give that which is holy unto the dogs, and do not cast your pearls before the swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and rip you apart. Isn't that what the Christians did to the Jews? Like I said, 2,000 years or nearly 2,000 years worth of history proves this is the case. I'm going to go to the narrow gate here. Enter you in at the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many are there which go therein. So you trying to tell me that the nearly 2 billion Christians in the world today are right? Well, I tell you that this one scripture right here proves that not to be the case. Because narrow is the gate and narrow is the way which leads to life, and there are few, very precious few, that find it. So I have to ask myself, during the times when I thought that there might be many who would understand the truth, the real gospel, of the salvation for Israel, when I thought that there would be maybe 1,000 or two, was I right? Well, I have to look to this for the answer, and there are few be that find it. Or, on the flip side, in the times when I thought that there was maybe nobody but myself and my dad, once again, I have to look to the scripture to make that determination. The tree and its fruit. Now, beware of also false prophets, pseudo-prophets. And one of the easiest way you can find a false prophet is if they are licensed by the state. Because if they are licensed by the state, they're actually committing fornication with the kings of the earth, or with the state. Because Satan rules the world. And anyone who gets a license from the state is a false prophet, false preacher, false pastor, whatever you want to call it. Which comes, and then he explains what they do to the people. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but are inwardly are ravening wolves. They stand at the pulpit, and they preach supersessionism, all the while claiming that they don't hate the Jews. And then they turn around and preach supersessionism, which is indeed hatred against the Jews. You shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs from thistles? What was the result of these men preaching to their congregations? Well, their congregants would gather up their swords and their lances and their spears and their guns well, in the old days, not their guns, but you know what I mean, to go and fight against Jew or anybody else who did not agree with their doctrine or their narrative. Once again, history is full of evidence that this is the case. Even so, every good tree brings forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree brings forth evil fruit. So when you see bloodshed, thorns and thistles, they cause bloodshed. When you see bloodshed as a result of preaching, whether it's indirect or directly, you know, from the guy at the Vatican all the way to Martin Luther, or anybody else like that, who calls blood to flow in the name of Jesus. Even so, every tree that brings forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree brings forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. So in other words, these people who he's describing as your false preachers, like for instance, the guy who gets his license from the state, who commits fornication with the state, he cannot bring forth good fruit. You cannot believe anything that he says. Nothing. Zero. Zilch. And every tree that brings not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Wherefore by your fruits you shall know them. Not every one that says unto me, Lord, Lord, or Adon, Adon, shall enter into the kingdom, but he that does the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say unto me in that day, Adon, Adon, have we not preached in your name? What name are they preaching in right now? It most certainly is not in his name. They're preaching in the name of an Apollonic name, Jesus. As I pointed out in recent videos, how the name Jesus began in ancient Druidism in jolly old England, and after Rome conquered England and brought Druid priests as slaves into Rome, Rome noticed that their Jesus was much like the Greek Iesous, and so consequently adopted the name for themselves. And to this day, when English speakers are confronted with the name Yehoshua, sorry about that, folks. I may need a minute. And in your name have cast out devils, and in your name have done many wonderful works. Now you must understand, folks, that this right here, and that I will profess to them, I never knew you, depart from me, you workers of iniquity. Who is he talking about? He is talking about these false prophets right here. So when we are reading verses 21 and 22 and 23, it is in reference to these false prophets in verse 15 through verse 20. Now, America, whose house is built upon sand, once again, let's find a frame of reference here. The house that is built on rock, he says, therefore, or the Hebrew word for therefore, this has Greek, but it would have been the Hebrew word for. So because of this, let everyone, everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man which builds his house on a rock. This would be in reference to these good trees bringing forth good fruit. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the wind blew and beat upon that house, and it did not fall, because it was founded upon a rock. That rock being the words of Yehoshua. You see. Therefore, those who hear these sayings of mine, it would be the words of Yehoshua. And the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded upon a rock. And everyone that hears these sayings of mine and does them not, what do? Well, they go and chase after idolatry, Apollyon, whatever, and the sword shall be likened unto a foolish man who built his house upon the sand, and the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. So now I'm going to show you, folks, that America's house is indeed built upon sand. And I'm going to use the words of, what is her name? Cynthia Chung, I believe her name is. Yeah, Cynthia Chung. The origins of America's secret police. Now, you can add all the 3-digit government agencies in there, and they would qualify. I know she's talking about the one that begins with F, but it can be the one that begins with C, the one that begins with N, and on you go. When will the American people realize that the biggest threat to American freedom is not from outside, but from within its very own walls, where it has been prominently residing for the last 112 years? Well, Miss Cynthia, I have a feeling that it has been going on longer than that, but I'll go ahead and run with your statement here. Know thyself, nothing to excess surety brings ruin, inscribed in the temple of Apollo at Delphi. Many are aware of the Apollo at Delphi inscription and associate it as words of wisdom. After all, the temple at Delphi was at the center of global intelligence. Kings, emperors, statesmen, generals from all quarters of the ancient world would travel to the temple with a very generous payment in gold, and hopes that the wisdom of the great god Apollyon, would be disposed on them and give strength and power to their particular cause. One of the most famous prophecies made by the cult of Delphi, according to the ancient historian Herodotus, was King Croesus of Lydia. King Croesus was a very rich king and the last bastion of the Ionian cities against the increasing Persian power in Anatolia. King Croesus wished to know whether he should continue his military campaign deeper into Persian Empire territory, and whether he should seek a military alliance in such a feat. According to Herodotus, the amount of gold King Croesus delivered was the greatest ever to be bestowed upon the temple of Apollo. Now, folks, I want you to listen carefully, and I want you to notice a few things, some things that they even do in Christian churches to a certain extent. In return, the priestess of Delphi, otherwise known as the Oracle, some poor young girl, selected once a year with the right attributes, would spout nonsensical babble. Intoxicated by the gas vapors of the chasm, she was conveniently placed over. The priest would then translate the oracle's prophecy. King Croesus was told that his prophecy riddle, if Croesus goes to war, that he would destroy a great empire. Croesus was also told to ally himself with the most powerful Greek state, and he chose Sparta. Croesus was overjoyed and thought his victory solid, and immediately began working towards building his military campaign against Persia. Long story short, Croesus lost everything, and Lydia was taken over by the Persians. The Spartans never showed up. It turns out that the prophecy riddle was not wrong, but that Croesus mistook which great empire would fall. His own, of course, you see. There is likely a great deal of truth in the story, and the words inscribed at the temple of Apollo, "Know thyself, nothing to excess, surety brings ruin," becomes a more foreboding to anyone who dares enter such a temple in search of power and wisdom. Those who are worthy of the false god Apollo would have the wisdom to solve the riddle of their prophecy, and will prevail. Those unworthy of his fakeness' good graces would fail and be ruined. It's a nice story, but it is in fact a brilliant cover for a global intelligence racket. And in this case, she is absolutely correct. The cult of Delphi was indeed the nerve center of a military and political intelligence that had no allegiance to any state or empire, but rather was able to use intel they collected with their network of spies, along with intel they were given by those foolish enough to lay out their plans and their gold to them. The priests of Delphi would then decide thereupon what information needed to be shared with what target to fit their purpose, a prophecy that they shaped like moving pawns on a chessboard. The question for those who dared visit the cult of Delphi was thus not so much about having enough wisdom to solve the veiled prophecy, but rather what kind of pawn are you to the priests of Apollo? Those who seek wisdom and power have tended to also have an interest in the realm of the secret knowledge. After all, who wouldn't want a fast track toward their desires? Who wouldn't want to believe that their destiny is to be rich, privileged, and powerful? Who wouldn't want to believe that they were chosen out of the few to hold special qualities, one could even say supernatural, that make them superior to the majority? My, oh my, oh my, do we see this today in American politics. But anyway, I continue. The Scottish Rite was formally organized in the U.S. in 1801 as a group of Tory partisans on the losing side of the American Revolution. One of the principal men involved from the beginning was a British general by the name of Augustine Prevost. Prevost had conquered Charleston, South Carolina, and set up secret police apparatus there, which became the Scottish Rite headquarters after the British Army left. The Scottish Rite would come to rule over American Freemasonry during the 19th century, and Albert Pike is recognized as a source of this success. In 1859, Pike was elected Sovereign Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite's southern jurisdiction in 1871. Now, before I continue, folks, don't go and throw all of your nonsense in the comment section concerning the Freemasonry and getting off topic here. This topic is about following Apollyon, therefore building your house upon sand, versus following Yehoshua. That's what it's about. Morals and dogma of ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, the Anti-Bible of the Rite, R-I-T-E, was first published by its author, Albert Pike, former general of the Confederate armies during the Civil War, or as people in the South would say, war between the states. Why am I bringing this up? All when the focus on this paper is on the origins of America's secret police. because the man credited for building the FBI into the massive domestic intelligence apparatus that it is today was J. Edgar Hoover, who happened to be a 33rd degree Mason of the Scottish Rite, which he was coronated in 1955 after 35 years of membership. Why is this relevant for the purpose of this paper? If one is to understand what constitutes the morals and dogma of such a membership to which Hoover entered the inner circle, the innermost circle, it would become clear that not only does the Rite act as an opposing church to Christianity, she says. Wow. You have no idea, Miss Chung. It goes much, much, much deeper than that. But pledging one's allegiance to the secret society is understood as coming before everything else in this material world, including government and country. For this reason, I think that it is apt to share a few quotes. Writing about top-down organizations, Pike wrote the following in his book, Morals and Dogma. The blue or lower degrees are but the outer court of the temple. So it is a different temple, you see. Just like these Christian houses of worship is a different kind of temple. These Christian houses of worship, they have their graven image. They have their, which is not allowed. Idolatry is not allowed in Yehoshua's doctrine. But anyway, I will continue. Part of the symbols are displayed there to initiate, but he that is intentionally misled by false interpretations. You see? So, this particular house, the morals and dogma of the Masonry, is built upon lies. It is not intended that he should understand them. Well, this is the same thing with Christianity. It is built upon lies, rejection of the words of the prophets, supersessionism, replacing Israel with the church, and it is not intended that those who enter into these congregations should understand. But it is intended that he shall imagine that he understands them. This is the reason why, folks, today, when I do these videos and point out facts in scriptures using Strong's Concordance, using the prophets to back up the words of Paul in Romans 11, especially in verse 26, they will not believe, because they are completely indoctrinated with a false doctrine, much like this Masonic doctrine. So, I know you Christians, you want to point at the Masons and say, they worship the devil. So do you. So do you. You do the very same things that they do. When people come into your outer courts, the symbolism that you display, just like what the Masons do, are intended to mislead by false interpretation. This is exactly what you do. And you do this, you Christians, when you declare that the Jews are the synagogue of Satan. And when you do that, you declare that the temple that was in Jerusalem, that Titus, the Roman prince, destroyed, you also declare that that was a synagogue of Satan. And in so doing, you are calling Jehovah, the Elohim of Israel, Satan. And that is exactly what this man Albert Pike does, and I will continue. But it is intended that he shall imagine he understands them. Their true explication is reserved for the adepts, the princes of the masonry. Emphasis added. These are the very same techniques used by the cult of Delphi, with the understanding that the true explication of the symbols will only be understood by those supposedly worthy of them, the adepts, the princes of the masonry. You Christians, you do exactly the same thing. How does one know if one is a prince of the masonry? Those who are foolish enough to have complete faith in the magic of the occult will give an honest attempt to understand such symbols. However, the truth of the matter is those who are chosen for their understanding and thus moved closer to the inner sanctum are merely chosen for their usefulness as an instrument of a higher will. While this person might be a pawn who plays a determining role in a checkmate, they remain nevertheless just a pawn. Pike would also write in his Morals and Dogma, men are but automata of providence, and uses the demagogue, the fanatic, the knave, as its tools and the instruments to effect that of which they do not dream and which they imagine themselves commissioned to prevent. Here it becomes clear that the majority of mankind are considered by the right as instruments of providence, and that to do the will of such providence justifies that the right treat mankind as such. I will address shortly what sort of providence they are speaking of. Now, indeed, Jehovah is the creator of mankind, and he does with mankind whom he will. But what this man was saying is that because, as he puts it, providence does this, that the right, R-I-T-E, should do the same. No, absolutely not. Because, you see, the clay is not the potter, and the creation is not the creator. Pike goes on to explain the right's main guide to the universe as magic is a science of ancient magi, or magi. Magic unites in one and the same science whatsoever philosophy can possess, that is most certain, and the religion of the infallible and eternal. It perfectly reconciles these two terms, faith and reason. Those who accept magic as a rule may give their will a sovereign power that will make them the masters of all inferior beings. And as you can see, your congressmen pretend to be masters of all inferior beings and of all errant spirits. That would be demon spirits. That is to say, make them the arbiters of kings of the world. Again, we see the concept that only a select few will be chosen to be able to decipher and use magic, and that thereby justifies their dominion that will make them masters of all inferior beings, and make them the arbiters and kings of the world. Pike wrote the above quote to instruct sublime princes of the royal secret, gentlemen of the 32nd degree. At this point, it is clear that to truly hold this view of oneself, mankind, and the laws of the universe means that one is in direct conflict with the idea of democracy towards a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Which is why, of course, folks, you have these people in high office that believe they are no longer subject to the will of the people, you see. Because your leaders have all been brainwashed just by this doctrine, just as all the people who go to these houses of worship on Sunday have been indoctrinated with this falsehood. The Masonic religion should be, by all of us initiates of the higher degrees, maintaining the purity of Luciferian doctrine. Now, I am quoting Albert Pike. If Lucifer were not God, so to speak, would Odone, the God of the Christians, No, actually, Adonai is not the Elohim of the Christians. Adonai was rejected by the Christians a long time ago because the word God is in reference, as I pointed out in several videos back, to Godin, the false one-eyed old long-bearded, white-bearded god of the Norse people. You can look it up, you'll find it. And why doesn't he say Jehovah? Well, he can't, because the Holy Spirit was not in him. Whose deeds prove this cruelty, perfidy, and hatred of man, barbarism, and repulse to science, would Adonai and his priests. So he accuses Adonai, which is Jehovah, the Elohim of Israel, not the God of Christians. He accused him of being hateful to man. Now, as I pointed out in my last few videos, the opposite is true. It is the Christians who demand that their so-called God be unmerciful to the Jews. It is them. Remember what we just read in Matthew 7. Judge not that you be not judged, because the judgment which you judge you shall be judged, and whatever measure you meet it shall be measured to you again. And why are you looking at the splinter that is in your brother's eye, but you do not consider the beam that's in your own eye? This is Christianity 101. What I mean is, this is what Christianity has done against the Jews since the fall of Jerusalem. So, as you can see, the father of the 3-digit organizations in the United States of America was a member of this Luciferian, Jehovah-hating group of Masons. But I know you Christians, you love to point the finger at the Masons, but I want you to take a look at yourself and ask yourself the question: does the Jew have to believe in your Jesus to be saved? If you say yes, then you are just as guilty as these Luciferian Masons. Why do I say this? Because Jesus is not the real Messiah. You have a beam in your own eye, you Christian. You Christians, you not only point the finger at the Masons, but you point your finger at the Jew. You call them the synagogue of Satan, when you, in fact, have raised up an idol to Apollyon in your houses of worship. And furthermore, the statue of Apollyon is raised up on Ellis Island in New York City. An idol, a graven image, a false god. So now what we have is we have a time of strained relations between brother against brother. How can this be? How can this be in the greatest nation that ever was on the face of the earth? This politicians have said this over and over and over again. It is the biggest lie ever told. Because greatness cannot last, cannot stand on a house built upon sand. It just can't. And you need to read Matthew 7 extremely carefully to understand what it means to have your house built upon sand. Now, what's going to happen to this house that is built upon sand, which has become very obvious to most right now? The rains and the floods are coming, folks. And the winds are going to blow hard and are going to beat on this house. And it's going to fall. And great shall be the fall thereof. It's true, folks. There's no way around it. This house is built upon sand. It's full of false prophets. Right here. It is full of the followers of Apollyon, both within government and in houses of worship. And you need to prepare yourself accordingly, but I must warn you, I must add that although it is wise to gather up food, dried goods, those dried goods are not going to help you when tribulation comes upon the Gentiles, as is written in Daniel 12 and verse 1. It's not going to help. Haggai 2 verses 18 through 22 tells exactly what is going to happen. He's talking about blessings for a defiled people. Talking about the greater glory in the new temple. The new temple was the Nehemiah, was that Zerubbabel's temple. Okay? And again, the word of Jehovah. Not the Lord. Not Jesus. Came into Haggai. In the 24th day of the month. What month? Well, it appears that it was on the month of the 24th day of the 9th month. That would be Hanukkah. Okay, just to make it clear, make it short. Saying, speak to Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel means those that are begotten in Babylon. Governor of Yehuda, saying, I will shake the heavens and the earth, and I will overthrow the throne of kingdoms. I will destroy the strength of the kingdoms of the Gentiles, of the Goi, and I will overthrow the chariots and those that ride in them, and the Sus, birds. Now this was an old Hebrew, and so in the days of Haggai it was old Hebrew, which means warbirds, in case you didn't know it, and it only later became horses. See, it's non-Israel says chariot horses of Canaanites, but then too in Israel chariot horses of Absalom. So I guess it could be chariot horses, but it also can be warbirds, as we read here. And their riders shall come down, every one by the sword of his brother. In that day, saith Jehovah of hosts, I will take you, O Zerubbabel, my servant, the son of Shealtiel, says Jehovah, and make you as a sign. So make him as a sign probably means would make his name as a sign. Those that are you that are born in Babylon, so to speak, or born in lands outside of the Holy Land must come back home. For I have chosen you, saith Jehovah, as that sign. So at the time of the shaking of the heavens and the earth, when Jehovah does the shaking of the heavens and the earth, apparently there will be so much tension between brother and brother that when this happens and they lose the battle against the Holy Land, against Israel, that they will turn on each other. And I want to go to Mark 5 before I'm finished. But I'm not sure if this is the right chapter, because this one is difficult. Because there are different... There's the Luke version and then there's a Matthew version. And one of them has all the information. And it came to, in verse 1, it came to pass on the other side of the sea in the country of Gadarenes, and when he was come out of the ship, immediately there came to him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could tie him up, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces. Neither could any man tame him, and always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself. And when he saw Yehoshua, he was given a Hebrew name, therefore it's Yehoshua, folks. Don't forget it. He ran and worshipped him, and cried with a loud voice, and said, What have I to do with you, Yehoshua, you son of the Most High Elohim? I swear, you, or I should read, I beg of you that you torment me not. For he said unto him, Come out of the man, you unclean spirit. And he asked him, What is your name? And he answered and said, My name is Legion. Now, let's go look at something here real quick. I don't want to get too far off. Now, these they are the self-described hacktivist collection Anonymous. Now I'm going to leave it at that, because these folks love to hack people who, as they say, disrespect them in any way, but I'm just pointing out to you, you need to look at the allegiance of Anonymous and make your own evaluation when you study them. And I will continue. For he said unto him, Come out of the man, you unclean spirit. And he asked, What is your name? And he said, My name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him much that they would not send him away out of the country. Now there was there near unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding, and all the demons besought him, saying, Send us unto the swine, that we may enter in unto them. And there forthwith Yehoshua gave them leave. And the unclean spirits went out and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. They were about 2,000 and were choked in the sea. Now, this was not the version that I wanted. Maybe it's in Matthew 8, verse 28. Or maybe it's in Luke 8:26. Here it is. This is in verse 31. And Yehoshua answered him, saying, What is your name? And he said, Legion, because many devils, many demons had entered into him. And they besought him that he would not command them to go out into the deep, the abyssos. Now those of you who understand Greek, you know that the abyssos is in reference to the Mediterranean Sea. What they had just done was go into the, with their swine, had gone into the Sea of Galilee, right? Why this? And he besought him that he would not command him to go into the deep, to go into the Mediterranean Sea. I think it might be in another version here. I had seen this before. I always have trouble with this. I might go to Matthew 8:28 again. There it is, right? There it is. It's in Matthew 8, verse 29. This is the reason why you need to cross-reference, folks. Not only do you cross-reference between the Gospels, but you also need to cross-reference the Gospels to with the prophets. And behold, they cried out, saying, What have we to do with you, Yehoshua, you son of Elohim? Are you come to torture us before the time? Well, they knew that their torment would be at the time of the very end. But when they saw Yehoshua, they realized, he might be coming to torment us now. And the torment would not be to be cast into the Sea of Galilee, but that torment that's coming at the very end would be to be cast into the Mediterranean Sea, the abyssos, as we just saw. No, because if he would have ordered, see, that would be the sea that would cause them torment. But that is for another video. But what I'm pointing out is these demons, these 2,000 demons, the We Are Legion demons, they are a spirit of self-destruction. They are a spirit of destruction, and that is what Apollyon is. Alright? Revelation 9, verse 11. Hold on. Let me show you something. Revelation 9, verse 11. And it says, And these things that came up out of the Mediterranean Sea, out of the abyssos, you see, they had a king over them, which is the angel, the messenger of the abyss, the Mediterranean Sea. Those of you who know Greek, you know the abyss is the Mediterranean Sea. Alright, so whose name in Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue his name is Apollyon, destroyer, the angel of the abyss. Now, I'm going to Google one thing and then we're done. Okay? Wait a minute. I want you to look at this carefully. You see this? Christ of the abyss. Religious destination San Frutuoso, metropolitan city of Genoa, Italy. Now I have a blood DNA relative in Genoa. Let's look at it. This, folks, is your angel of the abyss. This is your messenger of the abyss. And not only is there one in Genoa, you know, a submerged bronze statue of, as they say, Jesus Christos. It is the original cast, which is located in Mediterranean Sea off of. But then there is one in the U.S., one in Grenada. So there's one in Italy, 1954, one in Grenada, 1961, and one in the U.S., 1962. See, you have been deceived. You have been made pawns in the hands of your preachers, just like these low-degree Masons are pawns in the hands of these so-called princes and whatever. You've been duped. You've been deceived. They have taken your money, and they slandered the Jews. Your house is built upon sand. Your house is going to come crashing down. And once again, I urge you to please be ready for it. Be prepared for it. Because it's not going to be a pretty sight. You should have seen this coming already. You should have been studying Scripture. You should not have been following your preacher's false doctrine. And because you have, now you don't know what's going to happen next. You are bewildered. You are stupefied. You don't know what to do. Well, if your house was built upon a rock, upon Jeremiah 31 verses 31 through 34, literally. You see, that literally, that cuts out all the nonsense, doesn't it? You know, it's the same thing that was written in Hebrews 8 verses 8 through 12, Paul talking to the Hebrews. Romans verses to Hebrews in Romans 11. If you would have read that, and you would have read that in the literal sense, you would not have been deceived. You're just a pawn in the hands of those who took advantage of you, took advantage of your ignorance, took advantage of your willful ignorance. It's such a shame. There's nothing that's going to be able to stop the crashing down of this house, because the sand cannot hold this colossal Humpty Dumpty, this huge abomination that has been created. And this thing that said it was the greatest may end up being the smallest.